We've all been there. You just settle down for the evening, all comfy on one leg when you suddenly feel a bit thirsty. So don't dilly-dally. Have a quick sip and then settle down again. Because we're here to quench your thirst with a gulp of wonderful wildlife on tonight's SpringWatch.
Hello and welcome to SpringWatch 2022, coming to you live from Wild Ken Hill up on the northeast coast of Norfolk. We're here for 3 weeks, 8 o'clock until 9 o'clock, Mondays to Thursdays, bringing you the very best of British wildlife. And we started off well last night, I think.
Osmia. It's a bee, an Osmia bee. I'll tell you, it was a huge success on social media.
A little bee that finds a discarded snail shell and then lays all of its eggs in it and then puts a teepee on top of it. I know what you're thinking, it's going to be hard to beat, but we'll rise to the challenge because I can guarantee that we've got plenty of great wildlife coming up for the remainder of the series. But I've got to say, earlier today, it's been a bit cold and damp here, to say the least.
Oh, the heavens opened, didn't they? I mean, it's still spitting a bit now and it's chilly.
I know, we were trying to tell everyone we saw a tornado. In fact, it was a waterspout. But look, the wildlife was dreaming of umbrellas. It had to hunker down in what can only be described as a torrential downpour. It really, really did come down this afternoon. And of course, many of our birds, particularly those nesting in the open and those with young, trying to look after those. Look at the skylark here. Thankfully, those youngsters are underneath that bird. In the kite's nest, one of the youngsters, what an idiot, didn't manage to get underneath the female who was doing our best to protect the other one.
Look at them. They look miserable, don't they?
Well, they probably are miserable, to be quite honest with you. Their herons are really, really exposed, but at least they're quite large and robust at this point. So it is cold and it is wet, but our spirits are not in any way dampened. And one of our long-lens cameramen, Mark Yates, is out here somewhere in the fields looking for wildlife. Whatever he finds, we're going to bring you live throughout the course of the evening. Here, he's got red-legged partridge out there. Look at that, skulking about, as they do.
Playing hide and seek.
Not a native species, introduced by the shooting fraternity, but very much part and parcel of our countryside these days.
We have a theme running through this series, the restorative power of nature, although tonight I think it should be the restorative power of the sunshine, because I think we and all the wildlife could do with a bit of that. Hopefully spring really is on its way tomorrow. But, you know, this really is a brilliant place to be if you want to be immersed in nature, Wild Ken Hill, because it's farmed with nature in mind and there's so much wildlife to see. Hares, this is what we're seeing plenty of, these charismatic mammals on the farmland. You usually spot them when you see the little pair of ears poking up above the grass. Sometimes they're chilling in the daisies, other times you see them chasing each other through the poppies at speeds of up to 45 miles an hour. There was a recent study here on the farm that said there's 1 hare per acre, which is brilliant, and that's thanks to the field margins, the diversity of plants and the lack of pesticides and herbicides.
I know, well look, lack of herbicides is speaking for itself in this field. Just look at all of the flowers we've got here. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it hasn't been mowed. It's no mow May, and look at it.
I
know, more of these flowers coming up later in the programme with another sensational piece of new science. But of course, we've got the whole area bugged with our remote cameras. We can take a look at some of those now. Here, we've got a choice of 9. I'll tell you what, let's go for those herons and see how they've got on after the rainstorm. There they are. There's a bit of a heron there. That looks like a sleeping heron to me. Yeah, they've dried off. You can still see some down there, indicating that they are youngsters and not adults. And that is a classic shot of 3 herons with their heads tucked very firmly under their wings, avoiding the inclement weather.
You can't blame them though, can you? I mean, it has been wet and miserable and they are trying desperately hard to keep warm. But it's not just about us here in Norfolk. Megs is up north in Northumberland in Kielder Forest. Megs, have you been donating much blood today?
Yes, I am on my very own road trip for this week. And look, I'm coming through a door in the middle of a forest, because who has a door in the middle of a forest? Well, Kielder Water and Forest Park certainly does. And of course, we've got lots of our cameras rigged up all across the forest and on the lake as well. And this is what we saw earlier on. This is a little grebe bringing some nesting material to its partner. Now, at this time of the year, they do have that chestnut throat and cheeks. And that floating nest will be anchored down to a branch or some vegetation under there. But what an idyllic scene that is, that gorgeous green reflection with the trees above. Oh, absolutely beautiful. I hope all the best for that nest, and I hope it succeeds, rearing lots of young as well. But of course, it's not just me. Iolo Williams is over on the Isle of Mull, and I hope you're surrounded by more than just midges, Iolo.
Megan, we are getting the best of the weather up here at Mull. Glorious sunshine and, crucially, a slight wind as well, and that is keeping the midges at bay. I'm so pleased to tell you. And we're having a whale of a time. What do I mean by that? Well, this was seen a few days ago just around the corner from here. It is breaching minke whale. You are talking about a 10-metre, 12-ton animal hurling itself out to the sea and crashing back down again. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 9 or 10 times in all. How fantastic is that? And since we saw that footage, I tell you, we have been scanning the sea endlessly, because up here on Mull, you never know what's going to turn up next. We'll see you again later on, but for now, let's dash back down to Norfolk and catch up with Michaela and Chris.
Minke whales breaching 9 times? That's phenomenal, isn't it?
They don't breach often, do they, the old minkies? So seeing it is quite a sight. And recording it as well, even better, of course.
He's got the weather, he's got the whales, but he hasn't got a smorgasbord of live nests, and we've got that down here. So let's go to one of those nests right now. Let's have a look at our skylark, because I've got to feel sorry for this nest. We saw it at the beginning of the show, that downpour, and this nest is so open. They're ground nesting birds. It's incredibly vulnerable, not only to the weather, but predators as well. There are 3 chicks in there. They're 8 days old. Let's have a look at what they've been getting up to. As I say, the weather has been very challenging, and it hasn't just rained today. We've had a lot of rain over the last week. It's not welcome in this nest. There's very little protection, as I say. And there definitely seems to be affecting the development of one of the chicks. You can clearly see that one is smaller and weaker. And it seems to have a habit of falling out of the nest. And by the time it gets back onto its feet and clambers back in, the chance of a meal has gone. Both adults are bringing in plenty of food, and the other 2 chicks are developing nicely. But you can see they're out-competing the little one, even trampling all over him. Look at that poor little thing. So he's not having a great time. However, on better days, we have seen him make a surprising comeback occasionally. He's been making his little voice heard, grabbing his share, and we've all been watching this plucky little chick, and we've been cheering him on. But I've got to say, if the weather stays like this, I mean, he is clearly much smaller than the other 2 chicks. It's not looking so good, is it?
It's not looking so good. It is cold, it is wet, and of course that will impact on the bird's, thermoregulatory capacity, because it's not fully feathered, it's only got some down. It's going to get cold and chilled, potentially. But you've also got to think about the food component, because those adults are feeding that bird on invertebrates, and in the cold, they're not as active.
Yeah. Fingers crossed, though, because, I like a good story, I like a good end.
You always want to champion the underdog.
Okay,
have a look at this map over here, because this map displays all of the nests that we've got our cameras on at the moment that we're showing you. So, first of all, here's the skylark that you've just been looking at. Our base is actually down on this part of the farm. We've looked at the herons all the way down on the marsh here. Yesterday we were looking at the kites, quite close to our base in that woods. Michaela and I were in this field. We're over here. We've moved on to this side of the farm today, quite quite close to the barn owl's nest. But there's another one I want to introduce you to now, back near Mission Control, and that's our swallows. And we can go live to the swallows now. And of course, they're not worrying quite so much about the weather in terms of them being exposed because they're inside a barn. And that top shot there shows you that our 5 youngsters are quite well advanced. You can see a lot of wing feathers have grown there, and the tail feathers too. The adults have been really busy, in and out, providing lots of food. They are impacted by heavy rain because they're taking flying insects out of the air. And some of those insects will rapidly hide if we get lots of rain. So the feeding weight does drop down, but nevertheless, they're looking fit and healthy. Sometimes 1 or 2 of them have been out onto the rafters already, so it's pretty clear that we're going to be seeing them fledging. Now, what's interesting is that that nest is exactly the same nest that we were looking at last year, the same mud platform. It's been tidied up and new feathers have been added, but there's a distinct difference in the stage that the young are at. So on the left-hand side of the screen is today's birds, and then on the right-hand side of the screen, same nest a year ago. Now, we're not entirely sure whether it's the same female, but we know it's not the same male because the male this year doesn't have a ring on it, and it did have a ring last year. So let's take a look at this. This is a little diagram that we've got here. So last year, we know that the eggs were laid much later. They hatched later here, and clearly they fledged later. In fact, they fledged after we'd finished broadcasting. This year, however, the eggs were clearly laid much earlier, and they've hatched, as we've already seen, and they're going to fledge pretty soon, no doubt about that. So what has shifted the swallows into breeding earlier? Potentially the same female, certainly in the same nest, same place, same location geographically. Well, cast your mind back to 2021. We had a very, very cold spring, particularly April. Frosts in my neck of the woods. So that may have delayed the first laying. We spoke to the BTO, and they said, well, that might be the impact of weather in 1 year, but the general trend that we're seeing is that swallows are indeed laying earlier in the year. And this is a trend that we see in all sorts of other small bird species. More research was published recently following a long-term study in Whiteham Wood in Oxford, where they've been looking at great tits for 75 years, collecting data for 75 years non-stop. And what they noticed was, in 1947, the first year of the study, the first great tits egg was laid on April the 27th. This year, 2022, the first great tits egg was laid on March the 28th. Almost a full month earlier. And when they crunch the data, they see that those great tits are indeed nesting 3 weeks earlier. And that's not weather. That's not year-to-year differences in weather. That is the impact of climate change.
And that's amazing to have that 75-year study. I mean, you just can't argue with that, can you? Because that's proper data.
Exactly.
Right, we're going to show you another new nest, and this is, again, quite near where we're standing now. In fact, it's just over in that direction, near the barn owl, and that's a kestrel nest that we've got. So let's have a look at that live, because it's a fabulous natural nest. Look at that. It's in that hollow in the tree. If we go inside, we can see there are 3 chicks, 18 to 21 days old, and they're all looking pretty healthy. Obviously, they're in the hollow of the tree, so they've kept dry. They've got a very sensible nest. Let's have a look at how our kestrels have been doing, though, because there's the tree. Fabulous nest inside that tree in that hollow, and we just saw the female that goes in. Female's been bringing in plenty of food. Looks like it's a vole this time, and it feeds it to all 3 chicks. And you can see the chicks at this stage, this is a few days ago, have got plenty of fluffy down. Picking little bits off and feeding each of them individually. In this particular shot, this nest in the tree, now we don't know, it could be the same pair, but it's highly likely that it's at least one of the same adults. Don't know why they've decided to go in the tree this year and not the box, but they have been seen in that tree before, so maybe they're just alternating, maybe they just want to change.
And breeding a lot earlier again.
breeding a lot early, but I think they've chosen the right place because, as I say, they're
Certainly,
undercover.
certainly. Our long-lens cameraman, Mark Yates, is out and about on the farm. He's got this at the moment. Look, it's muntjac.
Isn't that lovely?
Yes, in the open. Normally a skulking little species, imported from China some time ago. Not a native species, of course. There we are. Look, little scratch. There we are. Very nice to see that. I'm afraid it's time, however, to apply a very stylish bucket hat because the rain has started here. Iolo, I don't know what's happening up there on the Isle of Mull. I was just casting my mind back, Iolo, to when I was studying kestrels. I love the smell of a kestrel's nest. Sort of musty, dusty and meaty. Have you ever had the chance to sniff a kestrel's nest, mate?
Chris, you know what, I gotta be honest, with a nose my size, if I put my head in a kestrel nest and sniffed, I'll probably snort all the chicks up and they'd disappear, so perhaps best not, I think, perhaps best not. But I do like kestrel, a real soft spot for them. And from one of our smallest birds of prey to our biggest, the white-tailed eagle. And that is the reason why I came up to Mull for the very first time back in 1991. I took 2 weeks leave from my job with the RSPB in Wales to come and help protect a white-tailed eagle nest. And if you were watching Winter Watch, you'll know that we caught up with an old favourite of the watches, a male white-tailed eagle called Sky, who has broken all records. He's 28 years old, the oldest known breeding white-tailed eagle in the whole of the UK. And he was paired up with Freezer. We don't know whether they're still paired up. We think they are, but they've been together now for 25 years, celebrating their silver wedding anniversary. And in that time, they have reared 24 young. And those young have spread all over Scotland. They're old enough now to have what in bird terms is known as great-grandchildren, probably great-grand-chicks is what I should say. And as I speak, one of them at this very moment is nesting on land belonging to the, I've got to get this right, to the Cairngorms Connect partnership right in the middle of the Cairngorms National Park. And luckily for us, the RSPB have put a camera on that nest. And this is the nest this morning. You can see there are 2 old chicks there. The eldest one is about 53 days old. It's got another 2 weeks to go. And 2 days ago, the male landed on that nest. And that male is Sky and Freezer's great-grandson. Isn't that amazing that just because of ringing, we can follow these birds and we can work out their family tree? That is brilliant science. And white-tailed eagles, they have a very prolonged breeding season. Starts right in the middle of winter, but luckily the RSPB camera was already up by then. So we know, for example, that the female first visited that nest on the 13th of December. They have a choice of 3, maybe 4 nests. She obviously liked the look of this one, did a little bit of DIY, not much. But she returned on the 18th of December, joined by the male, and they started nest building for real, carrying in sticks and branches and doing some work on there. By the 4th of January, there'd been a heavy snowfall, but that didn't put them off. They carried on building. They are hardy birds, these birds, they really are. And on the 11th of Jan, we first saw her what's called cupping, nest cupping. She's using her body to create a little dip in there where she'll eventually lay her eggs. And the inside of that nest, invariably, they are lined with Molinia, purple moorgrass. And we've also witnessed mating, not on, but right next to that nest. We witnessed this on the 18th of February. The female goes over to the male. She gets into a submissive position, indicating to the male she's ready to mate. They mate noisily, and the male then flies off. And they mate regularly, and all this is leading up, of course, to egg laying. And what we've seen there is just the beginning. There's a lot more to tell, and we'll bring you up to date over the next 2.5 weeks. And Megs, down there in the northeast of England, you're lucky, because down south now, of course, you've got white-tailed eagles down there as well.
Yeah, we do. Of course, there's been a reintroduction programme, and I was really lucky when the birds first got brought down there to go and see them before they were released. And they were astonishing. It's only when you get up close to a bird like that that you realise the sheer scale and the sheer power of it. If I remember correctly, it also had a bit of a dusty, musty smell, if I'm totally honest. But I have heard that they've been flying around over my house where I live in Southampton, and I haven't yet seen one, so I still have to keep my eyes peeled. Now there is a species though which I sometimes see but I more often hear, and that of course is the tawny owl. There's actually 50,000 breeding pairs that we have here across the UK. They like deciduous and broadleaf woodland, and they're always a joy to see. And here in Kilda is the longest running study and ringing of tawny owls, certainly in the UK, perhaps even in Europe, and it's been going for over 40 years. And I was really lucky to meet up with Martin Davison from Forestry England to go and meet 2 new arrivals to the population. Hello!
Hiya Megan, how are you?
I'm really good. I'm really excited for this, I have to say. Should we go and see how they're doing?
Most of the trees in Kilda are tall, straight conifers without natural holes the tawnies need to nest in. So the 200 nest boxes in the forest are a huge draw for the owls.
Okay, here we are.
Yep, here's the box.
It's amazing to think what lies inside it. There we are. Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, that's great thing. Oh no.
There we go.
Hello, little one.
It's fantastic, aren't they?
It's incredible, isn't it? Because you can see the typical tawny colour and feathers starting to come through, and even on the side here, we're starting to get some adult feathers coming through. Do you know how old they are?
These are about 15, 16 days old.
I don't think I've ever had an owlet fall asleep in my hands before. Oh my goodness.
Right, Megan, are you ready for the second one?
I'm not sure I am. A big cuteness overload. Hello, little one.
And just pop that one in your hand as
Yeah,
well.
of course. Get your feet tucked in, nice and warm.
Well, we better get them processed, get them ringed and weighed, and
Yeah.
see how healthy they are.
It's the middle of the night for the sleepy nocturnal owls, but it's the perfect time for Martin to safely collect the all-important data.
And we just gently slide the ring over the leg, and it's just like a bracelet.
No, it's great, isn't it? And if you ever
So-
catch that bird again, you're going to know immediately who it is.
Precisely, yes. So, let's
Okay.
take the wing length. That's 127.
Is that typical for a bird of this age?
Yeah, and you can see how its primaries are starting to grow now.
Yeah, look at that.
Absolutely gorgeous. It's so soft as well.
Yeah.
That's how they're silent.
You can always tell if it's an owl feather because around the edges it's really kind of soft and fluffy rather than that typical
Precisely.
structure.
Yeah, yeah. If you want to weight, you pop it in that little bag.
Oh, if I have to.
Just gently pick it up and pop it in the bag.
You're on, sweetie.
Too many hands.
Okay.
There you go. So if you want to read that off.
I would say about 270.
Yeah, that sounds about right for the weight.
Yeah, that's what you'd expect.
That's what I would expect around that mark.
So they're doing really well. There's
But
clearly.
these 2 chicks are doing brilliant.
From a personal perspective, you know, coming to monitor these populations over the course of a number of years must be something that's incredibly rewarding and exciting for you.
Knowing which box that bird came out of, and then where it's now settled down to breed, is really exciting.
What an impressive thing, and what an amazing animal. One of my favourite things about my job is getting to meet people who are passionate and knowledgeable about wildlife, and Martin was certainly one of those. He was an absolutely amazing human being who I was just awe-inspired about, and I learnt so much about tawny owls on the way. And him and his team have collectively managed to ring 5,000 to 6,000 individual tawny owls, and this long-term study has huge value when it comes to conservation. It's these studies where we get most information and are better equipped at being able to help the species moving forward. But we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the show. Now, everyone has a favourite animal when they're a child. Some like to go around the garden following bees, some like to go around the garden following butterflies. But for me, I like to look under look under logs and rocks and find things scuttling around in the undergrowth, and today they're still one of my favourites.
In a woodland in West Wales, spring has announced its arrival. bonanza of blooms stretch for the sun, triggered by longer and warmer days. But it's not just the flowers that have awoken. Bumblebees, pill millipedes, and snails are also taking advantage of the rising temperatures. And one extraordinary armour-plated creature is on the move. A common woodlouse. It's made its home sheltered in the rotting wood of a fallen oak. Its body has an exoskeleton made up of 13 segments. The first 7 have a pair of legs on each. Just like its aquatic crustacean cousins, the crab and the shrimp, it needs moisture to survive and must molt its outer shell to grow. First, the back half is shed, followed a day or two later by the front. Leaving its ghostly remains behind, our woodlouse has a new coat for the season. But there's a threat to our common friend. Spring has also awoken a deadly predator. Deep in these subterranean tunnels, the creature lurks, waiting to skewer a tasty meal. The woodlouse spider. It lives tucked away in a crevice within this wooden maze and has chosen its home wisely. Right by a woodlouse highway. Unaware of the danger hiding in the shadows, the woodlouse is walking straight into a trap. Equipped with needle-sharp horizontal fangs that can puncture the toughest armour, it's an easy catch for the spider. The predator latches onto its prey, and when it strikes, there's no escaping the 8-legged assassin. For the woodlouse, spring has been short-lived. But for the spider, the sustenance will see it through. Until the next unsuspecting common woodlouse scuttles into view.
Isn't it amazing to see all the interaction and all the drama of creatures that most people overlook and take for granted? Absolutely fascinating. We wouldn't see it unless we managed to film it like that. So I think a little nod has to go to a very talented young man who did film that, Jake Morris, who's just 18 years old.
Great, wasn't it?
Amazing, amazing. Do you know that I was looking up nicknames for woodlouse, and listen to these. These are just a few of them. Bibblebug, Chiselhog, Chuggy Pig, Johnny Grump. I mean, an extraordinary amount of nicknames for what is quite an unassuming little creature.
Yeah, they're unassuming, but everyone meets them. You know, they do come into your house, you turn over a log, they're there, aren't they? They're one of those creatures very much part and parcel of our lives,
Go down to the pub with them, you know, with what's his name, Johnny Grump. Go down to the pub with Johnny Grump.
Maybe not. Hey, look, we were looking at the beginning of the programme. Look at this meadow, full of flowers. Now, I've said it before, I think it's worth saying again. If you've got an interest in natural history, sometimes the ability to retain a childlike questioning ability, not a childish, but a childlike questioning ability, is often useful. So you look at these flowers and you think, what are they for? there's got to be a reason for them. What are the flowers for? Well, they're advertisements, aren't they? They're advertising something, because these plants are rooted to the ground and they need help to move about, either moving their genetical material in the form of pollen, or later, once they've been fertilised, their seeds, and very often that's wind or animals that will move them. So they're advertising the fact that they've got nectar, and this means that they attract a wealth of insects. The insects, of course, come for that nectar, and at the same time they pick up the pollen and transfer it from plant to plant. How do they find the flowers? Well, firstly, the first part of that advertisement is the scent. And we know that butterflies and bees can smell specific flowers from at least 500 to a kilometre away. So they smell them, then they get closer and they see them. Now remember, their eyes are different than ours. They're very often looking in the ultraviolet part of the spectrum. So when we look down at these daisies, they're white and yellow and the clover is purple, but to the insects it could be completely different. But what's astonishing is that it doesn't stop there. In 2017, some researchers from Bristol University published some new information in a journal called eLife. And that information was that they looked at 118 different species of plant, and they found that 55% of them had unique thermal signatures. When they looked at them, they could see that they were radiating heat in a very particular way.
So they loaned us their thermal camera, this is from Bristol University, to try it out on some of the flowers that we're seeing around us now. And this is what we saw. It's really astonishing. Now remember, it's the yellow. You see there, you can see the bee. It's obviously got heat, it's emitting heat. It was yellow, but look at the plants. Look at those thermal images. Right in the middle, they're hot. That's a butterfly, you'd expect it to be emitting heat. Each flower species, as Chris said, has its own unique heat pattern. They're extraordinary, aren't they? And if we look at the pictures, then we can really clearly see, let's say the inside of that daisy is yellow. It's emitting heat. The poppy, the red is also heat. The purple, interesting enough, that's not emitting any heat. And they're looking into the reasons why the centre of the flower, which you'd expect to be hotter, is cooler. But it's all new science and they're learning new things about it all the time. But it kind of looks really cool, doesn't it? In the thermal imaging
Amazing. Look, I've got a couple of fabulous, to honour the work being done at Bristol University. Our excellent POPs department have come up with these diagrams here. So this is what we see when we look at a poppy. Remember, the insects are seeing it completely different. But then let's see what they have in front of them when it comes to the heat pattern of the poppy. So here again, as Michaela said, cooler in the middle, but then warmer patches around the outside. And if we do the same with the daisy, I pull that off of there, and again that's hot in the centre with this heat pattern here. Now, what would be the draw? You know, why is this happening? The same researchers found in 2006 that bees preferred to go to hotter flowers. Why would that be? Well, think about it. Those insects are what we call endothermic. They're largely reliant on the external temperature to keep them moving. So, of course, they're going to love it in a nice warm flower. And they are nice and warm because these parts of the flower can be 4 or 5 or up to 11 degrees centigrade warmer than the rest of the flower. So for the bee, this is a reward. They're not only going there to get nectar, they're going there to warm up so that they can then be warm enough to go to another flower. Great benefit for the plants, of course, because the pollen is being spread from one plant to another. How do they do it? It's the last piece of the jigsaw. Well, we're not entirely sure, but we think that cells, conical cells inside the petals, focus the sunlight on tiny organelles inside the body of the cells in the petals on some pigments which act as heat sinks. They vibrate and they warm up. What about that? You've got scent, you've got the visual attraction of the flower, and now you've got a flower which is warming itself up with a characteristic pattern which...
They're coming from the sunshine, and it's lovely to see the meadow down there, because on Treshnish Farm we've got a beautiful flower meadow up here as well. It's a joy to sit and enjoy the blooms. They're fantastic. Now, if ever you come up to Mull and you drive around, you're bound to have a little bird dashing in front of your car. It'll perch up briefly before it dashes off again. I'm talking about the wheatear. It's an African migrant that arrives here very early, actually in mid-March. It's one of the first migrants to arrive up here. This is a lovely male peeking over the rock there. Then they breed up here. They're quite common up here before they head back south again in September. You will, if you're patient, get a good view of it, but invariably the view you get is the back end flying away. And when you see that, notice that bright white rump, because that is what gives it its Welsh name. The Welsh name is Tynwen y Garn. Literally, it means the white-bummed bird of the rocks. Isn't that a brilliant name? So the next time you see a wheatear, think that is the white-bummed bird of the rocks. And there are two other quite similar birds up here now as well. I'm talking about the chats, the stone chat and the wind chat. And the stone chat, perky little bird, sits up often on gorse or on a post, chacking away there. It's a resident here all year round. The wind chat, on the other hand, well, that's a migrant, a late arrival. It arrives late April usually up here, prefers brackeny covered areas. And the name, well, that's significant, whin chat. Whin is the old Northern English name for furze or gorse, and referring to rough habitat just like this. That tells you where you find the bird. But how about the stone chat? Where does that get its name? Well, let me just get my rocks out. Have a look at this. Listen to this. That is the alarm call of a stone chat. Let's hear the bird itself now. Isn't that brilliant? And you might laugh thinking, banging two rocks together, but I tell you what, I've attracted a male stone chat to me by hiding in the gorse and banging those rocks. It's come in to have a look and alarm at me. Now, some people, especially learners, might find it difficult to tell the difference between those two birds. Let's have another quick look at them now. The wind chat and stone chat, male and female. Start with the stone chat. The male there, go for the black head, the dark head, and that white collar. And on the wind chat, look for that distinctive stripe, white stripe above the eye. And the fact there's only a little bit of orange on the throat. And with the females, well, they've got the same patterns as the males, but I always think they look like a bird that's gone through the washing machine and the colours have faded. There we are. I hope that helps you when you're out in the field and you see one of these birds again. Now, another bird that's difficult to see, has become very elusive as well these days, is the lesser spotted woodpecker. When I was in my teens and my 20s, working for the RSPB in Mid Wales, I'd find 4 or 5 pairs in and around Newtown. Now when I go out, there's not a single pair left, and it's declined throughout the UK. But thankfully, there are still 1 or 2 places where it can be found.
The frost still clings to the ground in Sherwood Forest. But it isn't just the warming sun that spring brings to the woodland. This sound is the signal for RSPB volunteers Indy Green and Jack Badams to start their mission for the day.
We're out here looking for the brilliant lesser-spotted woodpecker. Lesser-spotted woodpeckers are a really, really rare bird species, and they are really declining across the UK, where we have a relatively stable population in Sherwood Forest.
With numbers falling nationally by up to 80% in recent years, places like Sherwood Forest have become a lifeline for these elusive birds. But they're not easy to find.
The lesser-spotted woodpecker is the tiny bird with the titanic territory. One lesser-spotted woodpecker pair can have a territory that within it could host up to 500 blue tits. They're such incredibly secretive birds. For most of the year, they just melt into the forest. They're a tiny little sparrow-sized bird, and you only get this really brief period of activity where they go from being massively introverted to hugely extroverted, and they start drumming and they start displaying and they're setting up their territories, but it only lasts from maybe end of February through to mid-March.
Jack and Indy are trying to map their territories, but they only have 2 weeks to get what they need before the birds stop drumming, settle down to nest, and new leaves on the trees render them almost invisible. So they split up, allowing them to track the woodpecker's movements.
Anything down your end yet?
Yeah, I'm just going to walk up a little bit further. I'm nearly at the top of the track.
And whilst their communication may be electronic, the old methods proved best for listening for drumming.
Look a bit daft doing this, but it does help. Just there. That's lesser spot, yeah. They look for generally dead branches because they echo really well. We've got it drumming at the top of a birch tree.
Have you still got it?
Yeah, I've got it. It's right above the path, yeah. Right underneath it now. Just the one, female, now taken off and flying straight down the length of the path towards you.
So we've just got a drumming on the top of a dead ancient oak tree. Oh, that's brilliant. You can hear a drumming so loud. I'm just going to listen to that sound.
The woodpecker's drumming is their version of a song. They're advertising their territory and presence to potential mates and rivals.
And she's just found a different piece of wood. They get different pieces of wood and they find out which one projects their drum the most. That's awesome. She's just flown off towards you, so keep an eye out.
The short courtship season provides a crucial insight into the woodpeckers' lives.
Just last week, we had 2 females fighting over a single male.
Yeah.
Doing stuff that I'd never seen them do before. They had their tail feathers out, they were posturing.
Wings out.
They had their wings out, they were shouting like parrots. It was unbelievable. They were making themselves look so big. And all the time, while these 2 females were bickering, the male was just about 10 metres away, doing his own thing, and these 2 females were just like that, and like shouting and screaming and chasing each other.
I've never seen anything like that.
It's the best, my best ever nature experience, that was.
By 10 a.m, Jack and Indy are ready to mark up their map.
So we definitely had a few confirmed sightings of where you were straight over to me.
Yeah.
Pretty active today, although just the one this time.
It was just the one, wasn't it?
Just
It
a
was
female.
interesting.
But interesting that last week we had the pair and an extra female probably fighting and going at it.
And that was there, yeah.
But now the pair seem to have gone quiet and we just have this one female.
So it seems like the pair have like properly settled down now, and now this one female is still going from all these different places, just continuously drumming and just desperate to find any other mate that she can get.
The data gathered today will be used to narrow down the search for nests built by successful pairs later in the season.
We can't hope to protect anything without understanding it as intimately as we possibly can. So collecting this data is helping us work out how those birds are behaving in what we think is a pretty good, strong habitat, so that we can then protect them for the future.
Great to see the lesser spotted woodpecker. They know they're birds, though, those two, don't they, Jack?
Jack and Indy, what a combo. Actually, both really brilliant birders. Good to see them together as well, bouncing off one another. Indy getting very excited, maybe a little bit too excited, mate, about the woodpeckers.
Well, they know they're birds, but do you know your peckers? Do you know your woodpeckers? Because some people think they've seen a lesser spotted woodpecker in their garden, but that's actually not so likely. It's more likely that it's a great spotted woodpecker. So what's the difference? Well, let's have a look, because we've actually got 3 species in this country. We've got the green woodpecker. Clearly you can see it's green, and then it's got that red cap. This is the great spotted woodpecker, black and white. It's got the long white shoulder patterns, and this is the lesser spotted woodpecker, stripy barred back. It's almost a bit like a ladder, but it's the size of them that really makes a difference. Huge difference in size. Obviously that's very difficult when they're flying in the air. You can't really see the difference, but this is the green woodpecker. I mean, it's a bit like a parrot really, isn't it? It's 189 grams, 42 centimetre wingspan. So it's sort of the size of, well, something between a jay and a magpie. Then we get the great spotted woodpecker. Let's put that below. 81 grams, 34 to 39 centimetre wingspan. So it's much smaller. Then we go to the lesser spotted, and you can see, I mean, these are 2 size, so it's clearly, oh gosh, he's not flying terribly well today. It's clearly very, very different. That's 25 grams, 27 centimetre wingspan. So just to remind you, that's 189 grams, lesser spotted 25 grams. So there's a big difference in size. And you've got the greater 81 grams, 25 grams. So just in case you haven't got the hang of it so far, I'm going to put a sparrow there so you can see. I mean, you all know the size of a sparrow, so lesser spotted is pretty similar to the size of a sparrow. And unfortunately, not only is it, oh, it keeps falling off.
Yes, that's what's happening to it.
The smallest.
That's a metaphor for what's actually happening to the poor old lesser spotted woodpecker.
Well, it is, because the lesser spotted is our rarest. Numbers have dropped dramatically since 1970. So well, about 75% at least declined since the 1970s.
So why is that then? What's happening to our lesser spotted woodpeckers? Well, there has been a thought that they are being predated by great spotted woodpeckers. Great spotted woodpeckers will break into all sorts of hole nesting birds and remove the youngsters, and they do nest in slightly more rotten wood in smaller holes. But recent research has shown that it's not that at all. It's unfortunately chick starvation which is leading to a gradual decline in that population. So in the past, when they laid on average 5.5 eggs, they fledged 3.5 young. Now, if lesser spotted woodpeckers lay 5.5 eggs on average, they only rear 2 young. What's the problem? What's happening? Why can't they feed their young? Well, look, here's a map of that titanic territory that Jack was talking about. So they do have a very large territory, and just to give you a guide comparison here, the Great Tits territory is only this big. It would fit inside that. Why do they need such a big territory? Well, it comes down to these trees. They need standing dead timber, but not only standing dead timber with little thin branches at the top. Because unlike the great spot, which can break through thicker bark, they need thin bark to break through to get those invertebrates, particularly in the winter time. And of course, it's not just about a lack of habitat, ancient woodland, a lack of standing dead timber. People like to cut the trees down, chuck them on their log burners. It's also a lack of invertebrates generally. And I was speaking to Jack at lunchtime, and we were both agreeing that the insect apocalypse, the enormous decline in insects diversity and abundance, is almost certainly, sadly, impacting on our lesser spotted woodpeckers as well. But at least now we know we can't blame the great spots.
It's really sad though, isn't it? It's such a fabulous bird. Of course, at this time of the year, they'll be making nests in the holes in the tree, but it's not always them that you see in those holes in the tree. Sometimes other creatures make the most of them. Look at this. I love this. This has been sent in by Sarah Scott from Thornbury. Red squirrel. Oh, squeezing into that hole, just about got its legs in there. Thank you very much for sending that in. Megan, now you're up in the forest, in Kielder Forest. You must have seen or maybe heard woodpeckers, have you?
I really wish I had, and I've obviously been keeping my ears and my eyes out for all biodiversity that lives in this gorgeous woodland. But sadly, I haven't come across a woodpecker, but I will let you know the moment I come across one, because I'm sure that they're here somewhere. Now earlier on in the programme I showed you two absolutely gorgeous tawny owl chicks that I got the lucky opportunity to be able to get close to and ring. But for me that wasn't enough, because I wanted to know what goes on when we weren't there. So we put up a motion triggered trail camera to see the activities of the adults and the chicks without any humans present. Now the chicks at this point are about 12-13 days old, and at that point they can regulate their own body temperature. So the adults aren't in the nest box when they hit this age. So you see them come up, land on nearby branches and bring in food. Now, ideally, 2 voles a night would be really good. They can survive on 1, but ideally more than that. But look here, this is probably the oldest chick taking one of its first looks out in the open world. What a world it is, a world hopefully that is going to be really prosperous as it continues to grow and learns to fly and branch off from its parents. But how far do they really go? Well, in Kielder they did a study and they found that actually these tawny owls are incredibly sedentary. They don't like to move very far from where they hatch and are bred themselves. They only move about 1/4 of a mile away, really short distance. And when you're reliant on that small area, you're of course reliant on a food supply in the same area as well. Now, tawny owls have a really interesting relationship with all of their food. Mostly they feed on small mammals, they feed on things like voles, they feed on things like wood mice, field voles and things like that. And if times are tough, they'll feed on rabbits, they'll feed on beetles, earthworms and even frogs from time to time, and their diet does change throughout the breeding season. However, tawnies here, we know, are reliant upon field voles. 62% of their prey, in fact, is made up of those voles. But the problem with field voles, well, not the problem, they're fantastic animals, but they go through natural fluctuations in their population numbers. And this is a cycle that happens every 2 to 3 years. And what you see down here, this is our field vole density. And you can see a massive drop and then a huge spike, a drop and a spike, a drop and a spike. And then when you look at the number of fledglings on tawny owls, you can see it mirrors dramatically the number of field voles. And what we begin to know is that if the tawny owl prey items, the field voles drop under 50%, then we know that we're going to start seeing a decline in tawny owl numbers. Now this study goes all the way to 2010, but obviously we were able to keep an eye on tawny owl fluctuations, not only through visually understanding what they eat, but by having a look at their pellets and the things that they leave behind. So here I have a collection of things that we've collected from various different nests, various different fledglings, and you can see what they've been eating. So up here you've got what you'd typically expect if it was a good vole year, voles and potentially a few shrews as well. If it was a good vole year, hopefully there would be a lot more vole jaws to see. But instead what we're seeing is a large number of feathers instead. We've got song thrush here, robin, pied wagtail and even siskin down here. And me doing a little bit of investigation skills, robins, now they're normally the first up in the morning and probably the last to bed at night. In fact, I just saw one feeding by my feet just a few minutes ago. So therefore overlapping in the tawny owl timeline. And also we've got these feathers down here. And these indicate to me a young bird. You can see the sheath here, so perhaps inexperienced young birds just out of the nest make a good tawny owl snack when vole populations are low. But I'm pleased to say for our 2 tawny chicks, things are looking up. Because if you are hatched in a low vole year, that means that your parents have personally been very brave, because the adults can decide to reduce the number of eggs or not breed at all. But these 2 have been reared successfully and they are heading out into a vole peak. So when it comes to their time to breed, hopefully there's going to be enough food for them to prosper. What a wonderful thing that is, and a really interesting relationship between predator and prey. Now it's time for our mindfulness moment. 90 seconds of utter pure joy and bliss. So immerse yourself in the wonderful world of damsel and dragonflies.
absolutely exquisite colours. It was like a kaleidoscope of colours, that mindful moment, wasn't it?
Beautiful. Before we go, I'd just like to show you these. These are what we call exuviae. So the one here, this one, the smaller one, is the exuviae of a damselfly, and the other is the exuviae of a brown hawker dragonfly. What are they? Well, these are the shed skins of the dragon and damselfly nymphs. And what's happened here is that these have climbed up out of the water onto emergent vegetation. If you look really carefully, you can see a hole in the back of this one. It's split open, and the adult dragonfly has withdrawn its soft body from inside this hard shell. And then, just like a butterfly, it's sat there hanging above the water, expanding its wings and its abdomen, drying them out to the point that it can fly away. Now, you might find these on the side of your pond, and what's interesting is that experts like Lucy Lapwing, who's just handed me these, can identify which species they are just by looking at the exuviae. Now, that's a naturalist skill that I need to acquire.
That is amazing, isn't it?
Beautiful.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. We'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. We'll be checking in, of course, on our live nests, especially this one, the herons. They're noisy, they're boisterous, they're full of energy, they're charismatic. We'll be getting to know them a bit better.
And I'll be submerging myself in the world of the critically endangered freshwater mussel.
And I'm going to be looking at one of the ocean's most powerful predators.
And remember, you can keep your eyes on our cameras, all of those here on the remote nest, from noon until 9:30. At 1 o'clock tomorrow, Hannah Stitfall will be joined by Michaela and myself for Watch Out across all of our social media platforms. And of course, if you've got anything you'd like to share with us, then please do so on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. Other than that, we'll see you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, promptly on BBC Two, and we very much hope that the sun will be shining on Norfolk. Good night.
Bye-bye.
To find out more about uncovering urban wildlife and about how regenerative farming affects our countryside, go to bbc.co.uk/SpringWatch and follow the links to the Open University.